It's the spring of 1241, and Europe is about to face its worst nightmare. The ground is literally shaking beneath an unstoppable force, the Mongol army, the deadliest war machine humanity has ever witnessed. Leading this terrifying horde, Batu Khan and the legendary Subutai, a tactical genius who's turned warfare into an art form. They're charging westward like an unstoppable wildfire, turning entire kingdoms into dust, standing between them and total domination. King Béla IV of Hungary, frantically gathering knights, farmers, and hired swords to protect what's left of Christian Europe's eastern border. But here's the problem. Nothing, and I mean nothing, in Europe can match the raw speed, brutal cunning, and terrifying power of these steppe warriors who have already crushed Russia and Poland like insects. What's about to unfold on April 11, 1241, at the Battle of Mohi isn't just a battle. It's an absolute catastrophe. A bloodbath that will decide Hungary's survival and send shockwaves rippling through every corner of Europe. Let's dive into one of history's most devastating military disasters. As 1241's early months rolled in, the Mongol advance through Europe had become something terrifying to behold, a textbook example of calculated destruction and mind games. At the center of it all was Subutai, the military mastermind who'd learned his craft under Genghis Khan himself. Now he commanded what was easily the most terrifying military force the medieval era had ever witnessed. His blueprint for swallowing Hungary, and potentially all of Europe, was deceptively straightforward but absolutely genius in practice. Split them apart, cut them off, and wipe them out completely. This wasn't some wild raid by barbarian horsemen. This was a calculated invasion, plotted years ahead with scouting operations reaching deep into the Russian steppes and through the Carpathian mountain passes. Well before the main army even moved out, Mongol intelligence agents had slipped into Eastern Europe, charting pathways, checking how deep rivers ran, and studying fortress designs. Every tiny detail mattered. They documented which valleys had enough grass for horses, when rivers turned to ice in winter, and which mountain passes opened up for springtime attacks. By early 1241, Subutai had arranged his forces like a grandmaster positioning chess pieces for checkmate. The Mongol forces wouldn't charge in as one giant mob. Instead, they'd strike as multiple synchronized divisions closing in from different angles, perfectly designed to confuse and crush their enemies. Béla and Khadan commanded the northern assault wing, smashing through Poland in a lightning-fast campaign. Their crushing victory at Legnica on April 9, 1241, eliminated any Polish-German threat and guaranteed that zero reinforcements could possibly reach Hungary from the north. Batu Khan and Subutai personally led the primary force straight into Hungary through the Carpathian passages. A third strike team under Buri and Bugate pushed through Transylvania, sweeping away local defenders and linking up with the main army near the Sajo River. In under 2 weeks, the Mongols had invaded from multiple directions simultaneously, smashed local resistance into fragments, and begun tightening the noose around the Hungarian forces. March 1241 saw the Mongols flooding into Hungary. Their advance guard pushed through the Verek Pass, meeting only scattered, unorganized defenses. Hungary's frontier fortresses, basically small wooden stockades manned by local militia, were laughably inadequate against Mongol siege technology and fire weapons. Villages erupted in flames. Terrified refugees stampeded westward, spreading horror stories of fire and mass slaughter. Cities like Varad and Gyulafehérvár were completely leveled. Priests and peasants spoke in hushed terror of horsemen who struck like a thunderstorm and disappeared like ghosts. King Béla IV, desperate to stop the devastation, commanded his nobles to rally their forces. The call went out across Hungary, from Transdanubia to Székesfehérvár, summoning every knight and church leader to war. But the response was painfully slow. The nobility, fractured by personal grudges and still suspicious of the king's reforms, gathered reluctantly and slowly. By the time Béla's army finally assembled on the plains near the Sajo River, the Mongols had already tracked their every single movement. The Hungarian force at Mohi was massive by European measurements. Estimates put it somewhere between 50,000 and 65,000 men. But that size was misleading. The army was basically a patchwork quilt of different forces. The royal knights and king's personal guard, well equipped but outnumbered. feudal troops under local lords, many barely trained, church militias led by bishops and abbots, bound more by religious faith than military discipline. A handful of foreign mercenaries, Germans, Poles, and some remaining Cumans who hadn't fled yet. Their equipment reflected Europe's feudal chaos. Some wore quality chainmail and carried heavy lances. Others wielded farming scythes or crude spears. Against Mongol composite bows and organized warfare tactics, this army was dangerously outmatched from the start. Still, confidence ran high. The knights genuinely believed they were unbeatable in open battle. They viewed the Mongols as simple raiders, barbarians who'd crumble under a proper cavalry charge. Almost none of them had actually witnessed the terrifying precision of a Mongol two-man operating in combat. Subutai had absolutely no intention of meeting the Hungarians in a straightforward slugfest. He understood perfectly that if the Hungarian army could maneuver freely, their heavy cavalry could inflict serious damage. So he designed a plan to surround and annihilate the Hungarians right inside their own camp. The dawn of April 11, 1241, broke over the Hungarian plains, thick with fog, smoke, and the smell of burning timber. Somewhere beyond the Sajo River, hidden in darkness, the Mongol horde was preparing its strike. The defenders of Hungary, knights, peasants, priests, and mercenaries, felt safe behind the river's wide waters. They couldn't have been more wrong. The Hungarian army had set up camp near Mohi village, roughly 5 miles west of the Sajo River. Their camp was enormous, a vast sea of tents, supply wagons, and campfires stretching across the plains. King Béla's royal tent stood in the center, surrounded by banners of Hungary's great lords, Archbishop Ugrin, Palatine Tamaj, and the magnates of Székesfehérvár and Esztergom. Camp featured a makeshift wagon fort, hundreds of wooden wagons chained together forming a defensive wall, similar to tactics used by steppe nomads themselves. But these defenses were incomplete. The perimeter was too spread out, there weren't enough gates, and discipline was sloppy. The nobles had argued endlessly over command structure. Some demanded retreat to stronger fortifications in the west. Others pushed for immediate battle. Béla, torn between pride and fear, decided to stand and fight. The Mongols, he figured, must be exhausted after months of campaigning. He had no idea that the enemy across the river was the most disciplined military force of the 13th century, and that they'd spent the entire night crossing the river downstream.
While the Hungarians slept peacefully, the Mongols moved with absolute silence and precision. Subutai, commanding overall strategy, split the army into several corps. Batu Khan led the main assault force at the Sajo Bridge, roughly 30,000 men whose job was to fix the Hungarian army's attention. Subutai himself led a second force of similar size southward, building 2 pontoon bridges under complete cover of darkness. Smaller detachments of light cavalry patrolled the plains, ready to encircle any retreating troops. The Mongols worked with stunning speed. By midnight, they'd crossed the river completely undetected. By dawn, the trap was ready to slam shut. Just before sunrise, around 3 a.m., the first alarm sounded throughout the Hungarian camp. Scouts reported movement at the bridge, torches flickering on the opposite bank, the sound of hooves and war drums echoing through the fog. Palatine Tamaj, one of Béla's bravest commanders, led a detachment of knights toward the bridge. They found Mongol advance forces attempting to seize the crossing. The clash erupted immediately and brutally. Mongol engineers had already started dismantling the bridge's defenses when Tamaj's men charged. The first Mongol wave appeared to fall back in disarray. The Hungarians roared in triumph, until the air suddenly filled with the hiss of thousands of arrows. Hundreds of shafts rained down among the knights. Horses reared and crashed into each other. Flaming pots filled with naphtha and primitive gunpowder mixtures exploded on the bridge, setting shields and banners ablaze. It was among the first recorded uses of explosive projectiles in European warfare. Still, the Hungarians held their ground. Their heavy armor protected them, and their determination burned fierce. By dawn, they'd retaken the bridge. Tamaj sent messengers racing back to the king. "The enemy is defeated, they're fleeing before us." It was a catastrophic misunderstanding. When the message reached King Béla, the camp erupted in celebration. Nobles congratulated each other, absolutely certain of victory. The king ordered the entire army to advance and finish the rout. Trumpets blared and the Hungarian host began marching toward the bridge, completely unaware that Subutai's army had already crossed the river several miles south. As the vanguard marched eastward toward the bridge, dust clouds rose behind them. Mongol scouts watched from the hills, signaling with smoke to Subutai's flanking force. The moment had arrived. While Béla's forces crowded toward the bridge to attack Batu's feigned retreat, Subutai's corps swept northward through the fog, aiming straight at the Hungarian rear. Around 8 a.m., the Hungarian camp exploded into chaos. From the south came the sound of war horns and drums, not from the bridge but from behind them. Riders appeared on the horizon, thousands upon thousands of Mongol horsemen advancing in flawless formation. At first, some confused soldiers thought it was a returning patrol. Then the arrows started falling like deadly rain. The Mongols had struck the camp's completely unguarded flank. Within minutes, tents blazed, supply wagons overturned. Horse-mounted archers rode in continuous circles, firing relentlessly, driving terrified soldiers toward the river. Béla, realizing far too late what had happened, frantically tried to rally his men. He sent messengers to recall the troops at the bridge, but complete confusion reigned. Battle sounds came from every direction. As Subutai's army attacked from south and west, Batu Khan renewed his bridge assault with full force. This time the Mongols pressed hard. Their siege engines hurled stones and fire across the river. The Hungarian defenders, already shaken by the attack on their camp, began breaking. By mid-morning, the bridge fell. Batu's forces surged across the Sajo, joining Subutai's troops on the western bank. Now the Hungarians were completely surrounded, trapped between the river and advancing Mongol lines. The wagon fortress became a death trap. What had been built for defense now confined thousands of soldiers with zero room to maneuver. Smoke choked the air as Mongols set fire to the outer wagons, forcing men to flee into open ground where arrows cut them down mercilessly. Contemporary accounts describe the scene as absolutely apocalyptic. The earth trembled with thundering hooves and the sky grew dark with arrows. Men fell like grass before the scythe. King Béla's army disintegrated. Commanders shouted contradictory orders. Some screamed for a breakout, others for defensive positions. Archbishop Ugrin rallied a group of knights and charged the Mongol flank, desperately trying to buy time. They fought with incredible bravery but were overwhelmed by arrows and surrounded. The archbishop was cut down, his banner trampled beneath Mongol hooves. Elsewhere, Cuman mercenaries, accused of treachery, either fled or were killed by their own Hungarian allies. The camp descended into absolute chaos. Horses panicking, wagons overturning, wounded men trampled underfoot. The Mongols exploited every single moment. Whenever a gap appeared in Hungarian formation, they poured through it like water, isolating groups and destroying them piece by piece. By noon, the battle had become a massacre. At the bridge, Palatine Tomaj still fought desperately to hold the crossing, completely unaware that the main army behind him was already annihilated. When he finally saw Mongol horsemen approaching from his rear, terrible realization dawned. They were surrounded. Refusing surrender, Tomaj led one final charge into the Mongol ranks. His horse was struck down by arrows. He fought on foot until completely overwhelmed. His body was later found mutilated, his banner burned. Chroniclers recorded his alleged last words, shouted amid the chaos, "Better to fall with honor than flee in shame." His death symbolized the total collapse of Hungarian resistance. As the Mongol noose tightened, King Béla's advisors desperately begged him to flee. At first he refused, insisting he'd die with his men, but his guards literally forced him onto a horse and fought their way desperately westward. Béla narrowly escaped with a tiny handful of retainers. Behind him, the field of Mohi was carpeted with bodies, knights and peasants alike, their armor stripped by Mongol looters. For hours afterward, Mongols pursued fleeing survivors, cutting them down as they tried crossing the Sajo or hiding in nearby woods. Almost none escaped. By evening, the plains fell silent except for the groans of dying men. Fires still burned across the camp. Subutai rode among the dead, inspecting the battlefield. His plan had worked with mechanical perfection. The entire Hungarian army, one of Europe's largest, had been annihilated in a single day. The Mongols lost comparatively few fighters. The chronicler Thomas of Split later wrote, "The flower of the kingdom was cut down, and none remained to defend the land." Contemporary estimates suggest over half of Hungary's fighting force died at Mohi. King Béla fled westward to Pressburg, then Zagreb, then Trogir, seeking refuge. Behind him, Mongols swept across Hungarian plains completely unopposed, burning towns and enslaving survivors. News of the disaster spread like wildfire. Monasteries recorded it as divine punishment. Bishops called for mass repentance. To the west, absolute panic gripped European courts. The kings of Bohemia, Poland, and Germany frantically prepared for invasion. Chroniclers described the Mongols as demons from the east, the scourge of God himself. In reality, Subutai's army stood poised to march into Austria and possibly beyond. Only the sudden death of Great Khan Urgidei in December 1241 and the resulting recall of Mongol princes to Mongolia spared Western Europe from invasion. But for Hungary, the devastation was total and absolute. Eyewitnesses who returned to Mohi weeks later found a landscape of pure horror. Corpses lay unburied for miles. The Sajo River allegedly ran red with blood. Wolves and crows feasted on the dead. The stench was so overpowering, one chronicler said, that no man could pass without becoming sick. Archaeological excavations near Mohi have confirmed the slaughter's scale. Arrowheads by the thousands, shattered armor, and remains of burned wagons mark the site of the Hungarian camp. The battle became a national trauma, a scar in Hungary's collective memory that lasted for centuries. After Mohi's slaughter on April 11th, King Béla fled westward, abandoning the capital and leaving vast territories to Batu Khan and Subutai's mercy. Within days, the Mongol host crossed the Tisza River and spread in all directions, methodically dismantling what little organized resistance remained. Past Hungary's commercial heart fell first. By May, Mongols had completely encircled it. When defenders refused surrender, they unleashed siege engines, catapults, stone throwers, and primitive gunpowder bombs that reduced walls to rubble. The city burned completely to the ground. Thousands were killed or enslaved. Contemporary chronicles describe horrific scenes: children torn from mothers, priests slain before their altars, churches burned with congregations trapped inside. Those who fled northward found zero safety. Mongol cavalry detachments, each 1,000 strong, swept across the countryside hunting refugees like prey. No mountain pass, no river, no forest offered escape. Hungarians called it Oster Isen, the scourge of God. Unlike chaotic raids by earlier nomadic invaders, the Mongol campaign operated with chilling efficiency. Subutai divided Hungary into conquest zones, assigning each to a specific corps. Their strategy was methodical: burn every village that resists, enslave the skilled and young, slaughter the rest to prevent rebellion. This wasn't random cruelty, it was calculated terror designed to paralyze any thought of resistance. The Mongols destroyed irrigation systems, trampled crops, poisoned wells. Livestock herds were seized or driven off, leaving famine in their wake. By summer 1241, the once fertile Carpathian basin had become a graveyard. King Béla, shattered and guilt-ridden, fled first to Pressburg, modern Bratislava, then to Austria, desperately hoping for help from Duke Frederick II, his own cousin. Instead, he found pure treachery. Frederick imprisoned him briefly, demanding ransom and Hungarian territory as the price for freedom. Only after Béla surrendered key borderlands was he released. From there he fled south to Zagreb, then to the Adriatic coast, seeking refuge in Trogir. From this distant city, Béla sent desperate letters across Europe, to Pope Gregory IX, to Emperor Frederick II, to the kings of France and England, pleading for aid against the Mongols. His words dripped with despair. "The Kingdom of Hungary, the shield of Christendom, is broken. If you do not come, the enemy will reach your own gates." But Europe was paralyzed by its own divisions, papal wars, crusades, and feudal rivalries. Hungary's cries went completely unanswered. Meanwhile, the Mongol machine rolled onward. In Transylvania, mountain passes offered brief resistance. Castles and monasteries transformed into fortresses, but Mongols were masters of siegecraft. Their engineers built portable siege towers, battering rams, and catapults capable of hurling stones hundreds of meters. Cities like Julafejavar and Kalasvar were destroyed. In Croatia, the towns of Zagreb and Dubica fell in flames. Only Trogir, where Béla had taken refuge, survived thanks to its island fortifications and surrounding marshes that hindered cavalry. Subutai sent detachments as far as the Adriatic, their horses drinking the sea's salt water, a grim symbol of how close Mongols came to reaching Europe's very heart. For peasants who survived, life under Mongol occupation was a daily battle for existence. Villages that submitted were spared but forced to provide food, horses, and women for the occupiers. Those who resisted faced massacre. Chroniclers describe entire populations herded into makeshift camps, branded with hot irons, and divided among Mongol commanders like livestock. Some Hungarians were sent eastward as slaves to Karakorum, the Mongol capital in Mongolia. Others were forced into service as local guides, scouts, or builders of siege engines. Mongols also employed Ruthenian, Cuman, and Russian auxiliaries, many of whom settled old scores by betraying their Hungarian neighbors. Hungary's social order collapsed completely. Nobles fled or were killed, monasteries looted, the clergy scattered. For nearly a year, no organized government existed, only ashes and terror. By December 1241, the Mongol army reached the Danube River, the last natural barrier before Western Europe. The river was wide and freezing, swollen with winter meltwater. On its far side lay Austria, Bohemia, and Germany, terrified kingdoms hastily building fortifications and calling for crusades. For the first time, the Mongols hesitated. Their horses were exhausted, supplies stretched thin. General Subutai ordered the army to winter in Hungary, waiting for ice to thicken enough to cross. When the river froze solid in January 1242, they crossed, not to invade Austria but to continue devastating western Hungary. They besieged Esztergom, the spiritual heart of the kingdom. The lower town was destroyed, but the stone citadel atop the hill held firm. It was one of the first major defeats Mongols encountered in Europe, a sign that stone fortifications, not open fields, could resist them. Esztergom's survivors became symbols of defiance. Their stand proved even Mongol might had limits. Then, as suddenly as they'd arrived, the Mongols vanished. In March 1242, messengers arrived from the east with shocking news. Urgedei Khan, the great Khan of the Mongol Empire, had died in December 1241. Under Mongol law, all princes of royal blood had to return to Mongolia to elect a new Khan. Batu Khan, though reluctant, obeyed. He gathered his armies and began the long march back eastward across frozen rivers and burned Hungarian plains. To terrified Europeans, it seemed like a miracle. Chroniclers wrote that Mongols fled before God's wrath or were driven back by the Virgin Mary's prayers. But the truth was more pragmatic. Succession politics had saved Europe. When Mongols withdrew, they left behind a completely ruined land. Contemporary reports suggest half of Hungary's population perished during the invasion. Entire regions were depopulated. The fertile eastern plains became silent, dotted only with ruins and unburied bones. Wild animals reclaimed the countryside. Wolves roamed the outskirts of empty towns. Famine and disease followed. Without crops or livestock, survivors resorted to eating roots and bark. Béla, returning from exile in late 1242, allegedly wept at the sight of his shattered kingdom. Béla IV would later be called the second founder of the Hungarian state. Determined to prevent another catastrophe, he launched an ambitious reconstruction program. He ordered construction of stone castles across the kingdom, hundreds of them, each capable of resisting Mongol siege weapons. He offered land and privileges to foreign settlers, especially Germans, Italians, and Slavs, to repopulate devastated lands. He strengthened ties with the Cumans, a Turkic nomadic people once mistrusted, now welcomed as allies and defenders of the plains. Most importantly, Béla centralized royal authority, reducing the power of feuding nobility whose arrogance had doomed Hungary at Mohi. It was a transformation born purely of trauma. The rest of Europe had watched the Mongol invasion in absolute horror. When news arrived of Kiev's fall, then Mohi, panic spread from Baltic to Mediterranean. Pope Gregory IX declared Mongols were punishment for Christendom's sins. He called for a crusade against them, but few heeded the call. Holy Roman Emperor Frederick II was locked in conflict with the papacy. France and England were consumed by their own wars. A papal envoy, Giovanni de Pian del Carpine, was sent to the Mongol court in 1245 to understand the threat. His account shocked Europe, describing a disciplined, organized empire that demanded submission, not conversion. Fear of the Mongols reshaped European diplomacy. For the first time, Western kingdoms realized their vulnerability and the desperate need for fortification and cooperation. For generations, the memory of Mohi haunted Hungary. Ballads and chronicles spoke of the day when the sky turned black with arrows. Churches were rebuilt with thick walls and hidden chambers, designed not just for worship but for survival. Monks recorded the tragedy as divine punishment for pride and disunity. But military historians later saw in it a powerful lesson, that innovation, discipline, and mobility could triumph over numbers and tradition. The Mongols had brought Europe to destruction's brink, and in doing so forced it to modernize. As for Subutai, he returned eastward to legend. In his lifetime, he'd planned or led over 20 successful campaigns from China to the Danube. At Mohi, his strategy of double envelopment was studied by generals for centuries afterward, yet he never saw his European conquest completed. Political rivalries among Mongol princes prevented a return westward. The dream of a Mongol empire reaching the Atlantic faded. But for those who'd witnessed the invasion, Subutai's name remained synonymous with terror, a reminder of what disciplined genius wielded without mercy could accomplish. By the late 1240s, under Béla's relentless rebuilding efforts, Hungary began rising again from ashes. New fortresses crowned the hills of Buda, Eger, and Visegrad. Towns were rebuilt along trade routes and the economy slowly revived. By turning tragedy into reform, Béla ensured Hungary would never again fall so easily. Indeed, when Mongols returned in 1285 for a second invasion, they were repelled, thanks to the fortifications and alliances Béla had created. What had begun as the kingdom's darkest hour became the foundation of its rebirth. The Mongol Empire itself began fracturing in the decades that followed. Batu Khan established the Golden Horde on the Russian steppes, ruling from Sarai. Subutai died in 1248, his campaigns over but his legend eternal. The empire that once reached from Korea to Hungary gradually dissolved into smaller khanates. But its shadow lingered, influencing trade, warfare, and diplomacy across Eurasia. For Hungary and Europe, the memory of 1240-11242 remained a stark warning. That complacency invites destruction, and unity is the only defense against history's storms. The Mongol occupation of Hungary was brief but apocalyptic, a year of fire that reshaped a nation's destiny. From the ruins of Mohi rose a new Hungary, stronger, wiser, and fortified. From the terror of Subutai's invasion emerged the first glimmers of a united Europe, aware at last that it faced threats far greater than its own feuds. The Mongols had come as conquerors, but their legacy was paradoxical. They destroyed, yet through destruction they transformed. Hungary survived, scarred but unbroken. And in the quiet plains where once the thunder of hooves echoed, the dead of Mohi still whisper the same warning, never again. The thunder of Mongol hooves that shook the Hungarian plains in 1241 wasn't just the sound of war. It was the sound of an old world dying. The Battle of Mohi marked the collision between two civilizations, the nomadic steppe empire of the east and the feudal kingdoms of the west. It proved that courage alone couldn't defeat superior strategy, mobility, and discipline. But out of that devastation rose a stronger Hungary, rebuilt by a determined king and his people. In the end, while Mongols vanished back into the east, the lessons of Mohi endured. Castles rose from ruins, armies reformed, and Europe, though shaken, learned to adapt. The Battle of Mohi stands as both tragedy and turning point, a moment when the fate of Europe hung by a thread and the resilience of one kingdom shaped the future of an entire continent.